Thomas Aquinas said that love beyond anything else is of the highest importance. He said love of God, love of self, and love of neighbor. It's like, I wonder where he got that, right? Love of God, love of self, love of neighbor. Right here from the gospel that we hear today, the two greatest commandments. And I just want to say a word, as Aquinas wrote a lot about self-love. It's kind of a thing of recent interest of me of self-love, and how as a culture we talk about self-love right now. And very much people have written about a self-love ethos. And it's like, well, is self-love a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Aquinas would say, good thing. Proper self-love, he says, is a good thing. But he also speaks about a disordered self-love. And so real quick, disordered self-love, an author summed it up this way, of what Aquinas says. A person attempts to forsake his relationship identity. This is disordered self-love. He attempts to forsake his relational identity with another, with God, for one's immanence. Selfishness, self-preoccupation, and self-concern become the norm. Since this goes against one's true metaphysical identity, the net result is sorrow and self-isolation. What do we see in spades today? Sorrow and self-isolation. There's Miley Cyrus is one of the pop singers today, and one of the recent hit songs right now, it's called Flowers. And the song's all about just this self-love ethos. This is what, these are the ranks of what the pop charts of what everyone's listening to. Not everyone, I guess kids and others, but I can buy myself flowers, she says. I can take myself dancing. I can hold my own hand. I can love me better than you can, which is the refrain. I can love me better than you can. You hear the hear the self-isolation there. You hear the sorrow in it. That's in spades right now. I think because of woundedness, because of a cynicism with relationships, with love, with brokenness, like there's a strong self-love ethos right now that's going on in our culture. That's a disordered self-love that cuts us off from communion, that cuts us off from relational identity. Proper self-love, Aquinas says, is when one recognizes their intrinsic worth as created beings in the image of God. When self-love is properly ordered, meaning it recognizes that God is the source of all goodness, it aligns, when self-love is properly ordered, then it aligns with the love of God. So then therefore, self-love always draws me closer to God and neighbor. And so what also do we see? We see, so it's like almost in the culture right now, it's a big time disordered self-love, but also not a proper self-love. Like understanding our own dignity and worth in the image of God, that I have intrinsic value. So it's like we're in this extreme disordered self-love, and also like nowhere touching on the goodness of the self-love, correctly ordered self-love. I'll just end with a quote from one of more of a recent popular spiritual author, who's written a lot of good short little books on the spiritual life, Father Jacques Philippe. In one of his books, Call to Life, he says this: love of God, love of neighbor, and love of self grow together and sustain one another as they grow. If one is absent or neglected, the others suffer. Like the legs of a tripod, he says. All three are needed in order to stand, and each leans on the others. And so, maybe with this gospel, which Jesus gives the two greatest commandments. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And then the second, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Let us make sure that we have proper self-love, especially in the midst of a backdrop of a culture that is very strong with a disordered self-love. Let us be careful for ourselves with that. Let's be careful who's under our control, our children, our grandchildren, and lead them away from those harms, which ultimately, as Aquinas says, leads to sorrow and self-isolation.